Welcome everyone to the Downsview Aerospace Innovation and Research de Havilland and Women in Aerospace event to celebrate International Women's Day, recognized annually on March 8th. I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered today on the traditional territory of many nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. My name is Anna Baginski. I'm Manager of Indirect Goods and Services at de Havilland, and I am going to be your MC for the evening. I'm relatively new addition to the aerospace community. My journey began back in 2019 when de Havilland sprung back to life. I consider myself to actually be the first new employee of de Havilland. Technically, there was 3 of us, but they're not here to contradict me, so I'm going to take it. It's a great privilege to be your MC today. Now, March 8th is International Women's Day. It's a global day to recognize and celebrate women's, girls' social, economic, cultural, political achievements. It's also a time to raise awareness for the progress made towards achieving gender equality and the work remaining to be done. The purpose of the day is to uphold women's achievements, recognize challenges, and focus greater attention on women's rights. International Women's Day is a day of unity, celebration, reflection, advocacy, and action, and is celebrated in many countries worldwide. As such, our theme for this year's event, the cost of not paving the runway, why equity and diversity is important in aerospace and aviation, is paramount and central to the plight and battles that women face across the globe. I know that we'll all find a special takeaway and meaning from today's event. Now, to kick off the event, de Havilland has prepared a special video message.
Coming into aerospace was not something that I needed to do because I was a woman. It's something that I was really passionate about being a part of.
I saw an aircraft when I was 12, and I just wanted to fly like a bird in the sky.
Every day I drive by on the highway and I see the Dash 8s fly out of Pearson Airport. Not many people can say, I did that. And that's what I love about my job the most.
It's only now, while being in the industry, identifying that it is such a male-oriented industry, it's very empowering and it's very impactful to be able to make a stamp as a woman and continue to drive the needle forward.
I'm so proud to be part of this industry because I know there will be never a dull moment. I will always learn something new.
There's so many options, and I really get the sense that the people in the industry are good, and I enjoy spending time with everyone that I work with.
What's really special at de Havilland is that our owners seem to have a lot of passion for their employees and creating a family work environment. You don't see that nowadays. They're not looking to necessarily maximize their profits, but to also leave a legacy behind and create something really special for the Canadian economy.
I think it's absolutely important that our organizations today develop diversity. You know, we are a melting pot of people in our country. I think it's the Canadian thing to do.
Yes, women are a minority in this industry, but what that also does for me personally is that we're also on a quest to find each other and create a nurturing platform for the next generation. If we can nurture the upcoming generation to the point that they're not a minority, I would be feeling incredibly proud of that.
It's a great industry for all women to be in. It's a safe and culturally diverse, encouraging workplace.
The passion, I think, for the CEO supporting this program and saying how important it is for our future success as a company, that diversity is the way forward, is excellent. And it also just kind of reinforces my commitment to de Havilland as well, and knowing that this is a place where I belong.
They're really trying to be intentional about how they build the organization. They've taken the time to hire leaders across the board. They're taking time to think about our strategy. And they're really committed to keeping aerospace within Canada, and that's something that's really important to me.
We have so many women now coming into the field, knowing that they're supported, knowing that they have colleagues that they can turn to if they face difficult situations, equipping them with tools to move forward with their careers. It's excellent.
I have seen the transition in past 15 years, and I'm really excited that it can only grow and be better than this.
I'm so passionate about the aerospace industry. It attracts and inspires innovators and people who are just so passionate about what they do.
Sometimes I feel that aerospace is perceived as something that's so complex, but actually, if you enjoy something, you can learn anything, and anybody can learn to be able to do this job.
There are so many different things you can do in aerospace, so don't limit yourself to the ones that you see all the time.
Be confident in your abilities. As long as you have a plan, you can achieve anything that you set out to do.
I'm proud to be a part of a Canadian company that they're willing to put women at the forefront and being able to build this strong group of female leaders.
I know that I have a great future with de Havilland. I have great mentors. I have a lot of great leaders here. They champion me forward, and I'm forever grateful for that.
Now I'd like to welcome Manjeet Jita, Vice President of the Industry, Employment and Community Relations, who will be speaking on behalf of Dr. Craig Stevenson, President and CEO of Centennial College.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Okay. All right. Well, isn't it lovely to be here? So first and foremost, happy International Women's Day. What a fabulous time to all be together to celebrate. So I'm thrilled to be with you today and welcome you all to our Downsview campus, the Bombardier Center for Aerospace and Aviation. Isn't it wonderful? I think some of you have had a tour, others will have a tour. I have to say, every time I come here, I'm in complete awe of this space. And in talking to a couple of colleagues that are here today, you know, they were astounded that this was just a space that really didn't have very much here not that long ago. And today we see this kind of site. And I asked Andrew Petru, who's in my division, said, Andrew, how did this come about? How did we create this wonderful space? And he said to me, he goes, it was a conversation with Bombardier, with the chief there, and the advice that he was given was dream big. Think about something that can really stand up within the Canadian aviation context and showcase what we can do when we come together as industry, as education partners, as government partners, and let's build that next generation of leaders in this field to be able to move the work forward. So I want to begin by thanking all of the organizers for today's event, including Women in Aerospace Canada, de Havilland Canada, and DARE, the Downsview Aerospace Innovation and Research Consortium. This group has really worked hard to bring together an expert panel of speakers, as well as tours of this space, as I said. And thank you to all of you, those who are joining in person and those who are joining virtually as well. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know that there's lots of people that are tuning in to this great event as well. And also to the members of the aviation and aerospace industry who are here today, and others, as I said, are joining us virtually. Our educators, we have Dr. Marilyn Harry from Centennial College, who is our VP Academic and Chief Learning Officer that's here with us today, as well as many others, students who are here, and members of the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, our next generation of experts in this industry who are going to lead the way. As a founding member of the Downsview Aerospace Innovation and Research Consortium, DARE, and a leader in providing world-class aerospace aviation education, Centennial recognizes that we have a vital role and responsibility to play in fostering a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable aerospace industry, where women with diverse identities and experiences can learn, where they can grow, and most importantly, where they can thrive in this industry. Today and across the globe, we celebrate International Women's Day, a day devoted to acknowledging and applauding the remarkable accomplishments of all who identify as women. It's a day to reflect on the advancements made towards gender parity and at the same time acknowledge the ongoing struggle of women to assert their rights and freedoms, both locally and globally. It's an opportunity to look at ourselves as individuals and as organizations, our roles and responsibilities in advancing this work, and how we are helping to create spaces and opportunities for all women. This year, International Women's Day theme is Embrace Equity. It serves as a reminder that we must recognize the challenges faced by women with intersecting identities and experiences. Intersectionality acknowledges that we as women are not a homogeneous group, and we encounter diverse forms of discrimination and marginalization, depending on our various identities, experiences, and challenges. This requires an approach that embraces inclusion and that also advances equity, ensuring that every woman and every girl has what she needs to succeed, to be safe, and to thrive. As a college, we acknowledge our duty to create welcoming opportunities for women to pursue careers in all fields. This includes those that have been previously male-dominated. This includes inspiring young girls who are still in school to consider careers in aerospace and supporting our female students to thrive in our learning environments and assisting them in gaining the necessary skills and experience to succeed in this industry. It's very important. I am inspired by the remarkable women leaders here today who have defied the odds and shattered the glass ceiling in what was, or maybe still is, very much a male-dominated industry. I'm confident that your accomplishments and that you as role models will inspire our students at Centennial and girls and women across this city and across Canada. They are the next generation of women who will follow in your footsteps in the aerospace and aviation sector. Through the newly established Industry, Employment and Community Relations Division at Centennial College, we're moving the dial on this work by committing ourselves to collaboration with our industry partners to eliminate barriers to entry and expand women's access to the vibrant and dynamic world of aerospace and aviation. I'm excited to hear from today's speakers. I'm excited to hear from the panel on how we can move this work forward. And I'm excited that you are here today at our wonderful campus, and hope to be working with you, and possibly today in the conversations, we'll develop new collaborations and new ways of working together to ensure that women and girls are part of this great industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manjeet. Now I'd like to, next we have a special message from the Honorable Charmaine Williams, Associate Minister of Women's Social and Economic Opportunity.
Hi everyone, I'm Charmaine Williams, MPP for Brampton Centre and Ontario's Associate Minister of Women's Social and Economic Opportunity. Today we celebrate International Women's Day. On the 8th of March every year, countries, organizations, and communities around the world pause to honor and celebrate the important and critical contributions of women that make the world a better place. It is also a day to raise awareness of the work that needs to be done to achieve gender equality. Now, I'm delighted to join you today on behalf of the Ontario government to welcome you to the International Women's Day here at the Bombardier Centre for Aerospace and Aviation in Toronto this evening. I'm so sorry I'm not able to join you, but I was so very impressed by the goals of Downsview Aerospace Innovation and Research, Women in Aerospace Canada, and de Havilland Canada. I appreciate the title of the event as well, The Cost of Not Paving the Runway, Why Equity and Diversity are Important in the Aerospace and Aviation. It's great. I understand the sponsors' goals are to highlight the invaluable impact women have on the aerospace industry. And this is indicative of the great work that you do here in the province, in Canada, and across the world. The conversations you will have tonight will inevitably pave the way for future improvements and the future generation of women in aerospace. I wish you a successful and productive event. Thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine. Now I'd like to welcome to the stage Maurice Harvey, Executive Director at Dansview Aerospace Innovation and Research.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome everyone to this wonderful event involving, of course, DARE, but also de Havilland Aircraft of Canada and obviously women in aerospace. We're delighted to be here. We're thrilled to welcome about 150 people of you here in this beautiful Centennial campus. And more than 150 as well are joining through our live stream, and they're coming from all across Canada. So welcome to you as well. As most of you know, DARE, our main mission, is we're all about innovation. We're extremely proud, of course, to promote innovation in aerospace here in Ontario, but we're also cognizant of the fact that a key contributor to innovation is the ways in which we choose to innovate. It's about our mindset. It's a mindset that requires a lot of courage to create cultures of inclusivity where everyone is empowered to contribute to the full extent of their potential. Sometimes it's easier said than done, though, which is why we're so proud of our members, de Havilland Canada, and Women in Aerospace for really championing EDI in aerospace and aviation. They're taking action, and it's worth applauding. Nancy and Robert, rest assured that you can count on our support, always. In a few minutes, you'll hear from Professor Wendy Sukier. She's going to talk about the impact that women can have on innovation and the opportunity cost of not allowing women to fully contribute to the aerospace and aviation sectors. This is what inspired our theme, actually, the cost of not paving the runway, because it illustrates the price we pay collectively, individually, and as an organization, even as a nation, when we stick to the old ways of doing things, rather than fostering truly inclusive environments. A culture of inclusivity creates better workplaces, higher performing organizations, and in the end, healthier and happier people. Everybody wins. It's just like taking off from or landing on a freshly paved runway. It's been an immense pleasure to work with such a fine group of women and men, and to see the result we have today. So I want to thank the member of our organizing committee, our panelists, our volunteers for their contribution, and I want a special shout out to Samantha, Glover, and Lee for the work that they've done to take us here. So thank you very much, everyone, and I wish you a great event. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Maurice. Our next video message comes from a great pioneer for women in aerospace, our president, Nancy Barber.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that kind introduction. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. As introduced by Anna, I'm Nancy Barber. I'm the president of Women in Aerospace Canada, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here today. Today is a very special day to me. It gives us an opportunity to reflect on the incredible contributions that women have made in our industry and around the world. It also gives us an opportunity to reflect on how far we've come, and yet how far we still need to go. I want to express my appreciation to Dansview Aerospace Innovation and Research, as well as to Havilland Aircraft of Canada, for partnering with Women in Aerospace Canada on this very special event today. I also want to recognize de Havilland Aircraft of Canada for their strong commitment to their Women in Aerospace program. Our keynote speaker today will provide you with some critical facts and figures to contemplate about our industry and diversity and inclusion within it. I'd like to point out a recent statistic about our industry and where we stand in terms of gender parity. According to a report by the Canadian Council for Aviation and Aerospace, men still represent 70% of our workforce, contributing to a staggering overrepresentation, considering that men account for 49% of the total Canadian workforce. Of course, it's International Women's Day, so it's important to look at things internationally or globally. Although we've made strides the past few decades, the Global Gender Gap Report of 2021 outlined the impact of the pandemic in that another generation will have to wait for gender parity. Previously estimated at 99 years, closing the gender gap has increased a full generation to 135 years. We will not see gender parity in our lifetimes, nor in our children's lifetime. We can all take action on this, and we need to, and it will take every single one of us. You will see our speakers and panelists include today both men and women, and this is for an important reason. The majority of our industry are men. We need allyship to advance inclusion. And when we speak of inclusion, we speak of all underrepresented individuals, not just women. We need to focus on a conversation about diversity as a whole. Our panelists today will share their stories, which are incredibly inspiring and motivating. And despite the many challenges that they faced as underrepresented individuals in their organizations or through their careers, they've made incredibly significant contributions that make our industry and the communities that we work in better places. They demonstrate exactly why we need to pave the runway. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. And I ask that you reflect on today's conversation and you make a personal commitment to embrace equity as we move forward in 2023 and beyond. Women in Aerospace Canada is an organization that is dedicated to expanding women's opportunities in our industry, and we are here to support you. Not only providing development opportunities, but also providing a strong network for underrepresented groups to ensure their success. You can find out more about our programming on our website, Women in Aerospace Canada, and you can reach out to us at any time to talk more about how we can support you on your journey towards a more diverse and inclusive workplace. Thank you, and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you, Nancy. I'm thrilled to present to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Wendy Tsukir, founder and academic director of the Diversity Institute, academic director of the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, and research lead of the Future Skills Center. Dr. Wendy Tsukir is a professor of entrepreneurship and strategy at the Ted Rogers School of Management, academic director of the Diversity Institute, and research lead of the Future Skills Center. She co-authored the bestseller Innovation Nation, Canadian Leadership from Java to Jurassic Park, and is a leader of disruptive technologies and innovation. Her work on the Diversity Leads project helped shape Bill C-25 and the 50-30 Challenge. She's also recognized with many awards, including the Harry Jerome Diversity Award, recognized in the 100 Most Powerful Women by WXN, and she's been named the YWCA Women of Distinction. She is one of the 100 alumni who shaped the century by the University of Toronto and International Women's Forum 2020 Women Who Make a Difference. Wendy holds a PhD in Information Systems, an MBA, an MA, and honorary doctorates from Laval and Concordia. She also received Canada's Meritorious Service Cross, one of Canada's highest civilian honors. She's also the founder of several startups, social enterprises, and nonprofits. It's a great honor to welcome Dr. Wendy Tsukir to the stage.
So nice to have someone who is Polish say my name. I wanted to first off thank the Downsview Aerospace Innovation and Research Center and Centennial College for inviting me. And I really have to give a shout out to Andrew Petru. I was the Vice President of Research and Innovation at the university formerly known as Ryerson. And this guy comes into my office and says, oh, we're going to do this thing in Downsview. We're going to get $20 million and we're going to have airplanes and helicopters and all sorts of things. And quite honestly, I put on my smiley face, but I really, really didn't see it happening. And so when I arrived today and saw really what started as Andrew's vision, I mean, I'm just blown away. It's just amazing. And when I was invited to come speak, of course, I said yes immediately. And you know, I've flown in planes, and I was on a couple of associations, the Canadian Aerospace Research Association of Canada, I think it was, for a few years, and really became more aware of the extent to which research and innovation drives this industry. And in fact, it was funny because when I was the vice president, we have an incubator at the university, and the president of GM came. And so we were talking to him about, you know, automotive stuff we were doing and wireless stuff we were doing and technology stuff we were doing. And all he was interested in is what we were doing in aerospace, because the automotive industry saw aerospace as driving change in a way that they could then emulate. So I'm going to, you know, I'm used to talking in 3-hour blocks, and I don't have 3 hours. So I'll give you some highlights of some of the research that we've done in general on gender and diversity in organizations, broadly speaking, and some of the stuff on aerospace in particular. And shout out to James Walton, one of my senior research associates at the Diversity Institute, because he put a lot of this together because he loves airplanes. And he was very excited to join me here today. So just about the Diversity Institute, this is not a commercial. It's simply to say that we do a number of different things, and aerospace comes up in all of them. So for example, as was mentioned, I was the research lead for the Future Skills Centre, which is a $260 million investment by the Government of Canada, and we sponsored research to look at what's happening in aerospace with some folks out of Quebec. And that really opened our eyes, I think, to the potential of the industry, not just in terms of driving innovation, but also jobs and how the jobs are going to change. Through the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, I've had the privilege of working with a lot of women entrepreneurs who are getting into the aerospace supply chain or running aviation companies. How many people here know Tira, whose last name I've forgotten, the first Indigenous woman to found an airline, and that was her claim to fame when we first started working with her, and now she's started an electric airplane company. There are women who are working in really innovative areas. Again, it reminded me of when Andrew came to visit me, who came to me and said, yeah, we're making these things, personal aerial devices. You know, my eyes sort of bugged out, and again, I had the nice smile saying, oh, that's very nice, sounds really good. And then they invited us to a conference, and we saw all the big players there. And because the rate of change, the imagination, and the potential of the sector is so immense. When we talk about gender and diversity at the Diversity Institute, of course, we start with a commitment to social justice. And in fact, I started working in this after the Montreal Massacre, where you'll recall women were killed because they dared to become engineers. But really what we see now is that it's very clear that a focus on gender parity and diversity is absolutely fundamental for organizations that want to survive. Because Canada is changing, the market is changing. Look at Toronto, half the population women, half the population are racialized. If you don't tap into those segments of the market, if you don't think about those segments as consumers, you're fishing in a pretty little pond. There's lots of research that shows the links between diversity and innovation. And there's lots that shows that people who feel included, whether they're women, whether they're racialized, whether they're Indigenous in organizations, stay longer. And retention is a big issue now as we have 1 million unfilled jobs in this country, and they perform better. And if that's not enough, of course, there are the risks if you screw this up. So when we look at those changes, I think that the data speak for itself. And, I can make some of this available if people are interested in digging into the details, because I only have a few minutes left and I want to get to the good part. So when we think about where the aeronautics, the aerospace and aviation industries are, there's no question we've come a long way. We see pilots who are women. We see pilots who are women, but we still see them as exceptions as opposed to the norm. We see more and more women engineers, but quite honestly, the percentage of women in engineering has only increased marginally since I started working on these issues more than 30 years ago. So there are steps forward, but as was mentioned, we have a long way to go. Is my time up? My slides are gone. The slides, they're gone. They're gone. I have no notes. I have no brain. Oh dear, what will I say next? That's a mystery. I think the next set of slides talk about issues of representation, not just in technology areas, but when we look at leadership, because it's one thing to get people into the industry. It's also a challenge to get them to the top in leadership roles. And we've done a lot of work looking at cross sectors at levels of representation in leadership, whether we're talking about executives or whether we're talking about representation on boards. And one of our studies, for example, shows that women are underrepresented on boards. Everyone knows that. But what it also showed was that in the Greater Toronto area, where remember, half the population is racialized. Oh, thank you, James. Where half the population is racialized. Thank you. White women outnumber racialized women 12-1 on corporate boards. So think about that. In the population, it's 1-1. And on boards, it's 12-1. Magic. There's lots of other data that we could talk about. Even when women engineers do get employed, they tend to earn less than men. And some of that is because when a man is offered a job, he will typically negotiate. Give me more money, give me a corner office. I want more vacation and a car, and I'll think about it and get back to you in a couple of weeks. And women are more likely to go, oh, you want me, I'll take the job. And that does have an impact, but that is not the only factor. That is not the only factor. Women typically are offered less than men, and that costs up to $500,000 over the course of their careers. We also know that studies have shown, I'm going to jump over some of this because I am concerned about time. We know that overall the issues are not just the underrepresentation of women in the sector. We know that the population is aging, and again, if you're not tapping into those new markets, it's definitely an issue. But we know that race is also a factor, right? And so while people who are racialized figure prominently in many technical professions. People who are Black do not, and people who are Indigenous are almost invisible. Tira Fraser, that's who I was thinking of. We also know that while there are more women in the workforce than there are men these days, women are very underrepresented in the sector generally, only about 30%. But then if you dig into specific jobs, as I said, like pilots, like mechanics and so on, the skilled trades in particular, women are even more underrepresented. And is anyone from Porter Airlines in the room? Just saying that, you know, we hear a lot when people talk about the absence of women on boards. They'll say, oh, you know, we like women. My wife's a woman. My daughter's a woman. Women are great, but there are none. There are none. And so it's really important to look at differences between organizations in the same sector. Because what you will see is there are some boards where 30% of the board members are women, and there are some where there are none. And we call those the corporate zeros. So I haven't looked at all the organizations in the sector, but it is an ongoing issue that really has to be addressed. And as I said, if some organizations can find 30% of their board members who are women, and others say there are none, my answer is you're not looking hard enough. I'm just going to zoom along. We also know that surveys of women in engineering and technology areas generally identify issues not just around discrimination broadly, but also harassment. Flat-out harassment in this day and age remains a problem. We know that stereotypes are an issue, and microaggressions are one of the most difficult things to deal with. Overt discrimination, whether it's racism or sexism, is fairly easy to identify. You know, you can't have this promotion because we're worried you're going to have children, or we don't think this is women's work. You know, some people who are my vintage have probably experienced overt sexism. But what's even harder to deal with are the microaggressions. And my favorite one, I'll test this room, my favorite one is when you're in a meeting and a woman says something and no one pays attention, and a man says exactly the same thing, and everyone goes, oh, what a great idea. How many people have lived that? And what's interesting is when you say it to men, they go, what, huh? Don't know, right? But for women, especially if you're one of the only, you don't know, like, is it me? Am I too sensitive? Am I stupid? Like, did I not speak loudly enough? What's going on? And microaggressions, therefore, are one of the most debilitating forms of discrimination we see because you second guess yourself. You feel gaslit all the time. And again, you can add the layers and layers. We know that everyone's screaming for engineers, and yet 40% of internationally educated engineers in Canada are underemployed. So, you know, the argument that we make is there is a skills gap, but part of the problem is employers are looking for skills in all the wrong places, and they just need to start rethinking what they require. And of course, you know, when we talk about persons with disabilities, it's one of the most horrifying data points that we have. University graduates with severe disabilities have worse employment outcomes than high school dropouts. Think about that. They get a university degree, they do all the stuff you need to do for a university degree, and they're no better off than a high school dropout in terms of employment opportunities. So we really need strategies that are based on recognizing and calling out what the problems are, and understanding that they're complex. Like, there are no simple solutions to complex problems. So we have to take a broad view. And when we think about the societal issues, we have to address the stereotypes, because the stereotypes are deeply embedded in our culture that associate men with aeroplanes, men with being astronauts, et cetera, et cetera. And even though there was a lot of work done with Roberta Bondar, it still didn't stick. Aerospace is still primarily viewed as men's work. So there's stuff that we really have to challenge at the societal level. And there are voluntary codes of conduct. Anybody here in an organization that signed on to the Black North Pledge, for example? So that happened after the murder of George Floyd, drew attention to the underrepresentation in the Black community. The 50-30 challenge focuses on gender parity and increased representation on boards and senior leadership roles. And about 2,000 organizations have signed up to state their commitment to moving forward to gender parity and improved equality. We have to have organizational strategies that really, I would say, mainstream attention to diversity and gender at every stage of our strategy, instead of treating it like a nice thing that the HR department does, and we have, you know, this kind of diversity report that comes out every year. We have to think about it at every single level. We have to think about it in terms of governance. We have to think about it in terms of HR, of course, but we have to think about it in terms of design. And I mentioned the auto industry, and some of you will be familiar with this data. I don't know if it's true or if it applies in aerospace. Women are killed more often in motor vehicle crashes, right? Because so many of the safety systems were based on tests conducted with male crash test dummies. So if you don't have a gender lens baked into your design processes right from the start, it can have dire consequences. Voice recognition systems didn't recognize women's voices. Facial recognition systems didn't recognize Black faces. The list goes on and on. So we have to think about equity, diversity, and inclusion, not just as an HR thing, but something that we bake into our entire value chain. And of course, what gets measured gets done. So I'm not going to go through all of this great detail because you're more than welcome to look at it. But I will say a couple of words about this notion of mainstreaming diversity in the value chain. And how many people work in an organization that has a supplier diversity policy? Do you know? A number of aerospace companies do, where they actually commit to a proportion of their spend on procurement being dedicated to businesses that are owned by people who are Black, women, and so on. That's really one of the best examples of how you can put your money where your mouth is. And it isn't that you're going to, you know, give some startup SME the job of designing the control system for your next airplane, but there are ways to think about how you encourage tier 1 suppliers to address equity, diversity, and inclusion. So procurement is really important. R&D is really important. Ensuring inclusive design is baked in, and that has to do in part with the fact that your customers or the end customers are going to be diverse. They're going to be people with disabilities. They're going to be men, women, and non-binary people. So that becomes very important. Thinking about how you provide sales and support and servicing is also important, and how you grow the pool, who you engage with, right? A lot of people come into the aerospace industry through internships, co-op, et cetera, et cetera. You have to think about how you get women in at the very earliest stages. And I know some of you have incredible outreach programs and are in the schools and trying to engage people in the discussion. And those efforts have to be increased. And I see that the slides are gone again. Oh, no, there they are. The role models become super important, and that's why we have to celebrate women, not just women in the large aerospace companies, but also entrepreneurs who have broken into the industry. And at the end of the day, change comes not because of organization policies and practices, but decisions we all make. Anybody in the room done the Harvard implicit bias test? So the Harvard implicit bias test was a real eye-opener for me. I've worked on women in technology for 30 years. I associate women with arts and social sciences and men with technology. It's so baked into our culture. That is a bias that I have. And so being prepared to look at your biases, to think about the privileges that you have that others might not have, and the opportunities that have been presented to you is critically important. And the other thing that is absolutely essential, and this is why I'm so pleased there's so many men in the room, is learning how to be an ally. Because egregious cases of sexual harassment, of sexism, of discrimination don't occur behind closed doors. People know. People see things. People will observe the echo chamber in a meeting, and they can say, that was a really good point when Sally made it 10 minutes ago, or something more polite. But reinforcing the voices of women and providing opportunities becomes a really important mechanism. And we've developed a number of tools, including the micropedia on microaggressions. So I've gone a little bit over my time, but I do very much appreciate your attention. I do really very much appreciate the discussion, and I'm really looking forward to the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions for her, and she will return to the stage at the end of our panel discussion. At this time, I'd like to invite Shreya Mishra, a passionate airworthiness and air safety engineer at de Havilland, who will introduce our panelists and lead the discussion.
Oh, thank you, Anna. I do have the freedom of mobility because I have a microphone in my hand, so I'm going to not be at the podium. Well, hello and good afternoon, everybody, again. And wish you all a very happy International Women's Day. You know, even if you're not a female identifying member of the community, I'm sure you know a lot of strong women in your circles, and just be sure to make sure that you take the time to wish them well today. You still have a few hours. So the videos that we saw today and Dr. Sukir's keynote, I think that really sets the stage really well for our panel discussion today. And so the aerospace industry, even today, a substantial gap exists in the gender ratio that we see in our workplaces. And although over the years, we have definitely seen positive changes that have balanced the scales a bit, but there is still gravel on the runways. And I think it is important for us to continue working together and continue paving the runway together. But how do we do that is the question. So we are very fortunate tonight to have our wonderful panelists here with us, and they are ready to share their experiential learnings, some anecdotes from their lives over the years, and give us some insights into how we bridge the gap. So I'm not going to continue talking, and I think I'll take this time to introduce our panelists. So first of all, I would like to welcome Ms. Sandra Howell. Sandra recently joined de Havilland Aircraft of Canada as the VP of Corporate Operations and Programs. She spent her career both in the private and public sector. In the public sector, she most recently held the executive role of Director of Operational Planning for the Canadian Coast Guard, where she was responsible for operational planning for Coast Guard's fleet of ships and helicopters, as well as service delivery. During her tenure with the Canadian Coast Guard, under Sandra's leadership as program manager, she successfully delivered and transitioned Coast Guard's new fleet of Bell 429 and 412 EPI helicopters. Prior to joining Canadian Coast Guard, she spent 3 years at Transport Canada. Sandra discovered her passion for aviation during her tenure at PAL Airlines, where she held the roles of Director of Training, Safety and Security, Director of Quality, and Manager of Maintenance, Production, Planning, and Technical Services. She is an active member of Women in Aerospace at de Havilland, Women in Security and Defense, and is a strong advocate for promoting advancement of women as leaders in the aerospace sector. Well, if that was not enough already, outside the boardroom, she is a wife and mother of 3 and spends time volunteering with the Ottawa Lady 67's Junior Elite Women's Hockey Program, where her daughter plays. She loves outdoors and fitness activities, including kayaking, hiking, and going to the gym. Welcome, Sandra. I would invite you to please join us on the stage. All right. Next, I would like to introduce Mr. Piyush Gandhi. Piyush is an experienced aviation executive, currently the VP of Operations and Business Development with the Presage Group, an organization that uses psychological analytics to assess employee behaviors, who are primarily pilots, predict areas of error, and provide mitigation strategies to ultimately help improve safety and performance of those organizations. Previously, he held the role of VP Flight Operations at both Porter Airlines and Sunwing Airlines, while maintaining his pilot proficiency, flying as a Q400 and a Boeing 737 captain, respectively. Ahead of these roles, Piyush was the chief pilot and customer liaison pilot for Bombardier Aerospace right here at Downsview. During his time at Sunwing, he founded and chaired the URU Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and similarly, he co-founded the Women's SOAR program at Porter Airlines. Since 2018, Piyush has been on the board of directors for the Redwood, which is a nonprofit shelter for women fleeing domestic abuse. In 2020, he became the first male elected to the board of directors for the Northern Lights Aero Foundation. And for the record, he still is the only male member on that board. Piyush, it is an honor to have you as a male member on the panel today, and your participation in this event, it quite literally represents this year's theme, which is Embrace Equity. Please join us on the stage. And finally, I would like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Melissa Reyes. Lieutenant Colonel Melissa Reyes has served over 33 years as a Canadian Armed Forces officer and is currently the section head for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance space systems within the Royal Canadian Air Force. She received her Master of Sciences degree in geography, specializing in remote sensing, and later completed the International Space University/Space Studies program. Among her many other assignments, Melissa has worked at the Canadian Space Agency, 12th Space Warning Squadron Greenland, NORAD headquarters, and the Kandahar airfield in Afghanistan. Throughout her career, she has been involved in various STEM initiatives and employment equity group, and feels honored to be a part of Women in Aerospace mentoring program. Please, Melissa, please join us on the stage. Sorry. Right. I will just walk over. Okay, so before we get into the questions, I just wanted to point out a couple of housekeeping items. So after this panel discussion with our panelists, we are going to open the floor for a Q&A session with the audience. Whether you are here in person or attending virtually, you will be equally involved in the Q&A period. So, and I'm going to share the details later on. So we're gonna first get right into the questions first. All right. So, Sandra, we have heard, we heard so many things about the diversity and inclusion initiatives over the course of this evening today. And we also know that the costs and investments into these initiatives plays a big role into providing the platform for these activities. So what are your thoughts on the importance of establishing gender equity in the leadership team?
Check mic. Okay. So I've been in the industry for almost 26 years. Started as a tiny child. Although we have come a long way in diversifying our positions in aerospace, I still believe we have a long way to go. I think, just as a woman growing up in aviation, one of the challenges that I had was, and not necessarily because my male colleagues made me feel that way, but I always felt that because it was male dominated, I had to work harder, prove myself. It was never give 100%, it was give 150%. And I'm sure there's lots of women in this industry that have those feelings or had gone through those types of feelings in their career. So, while I still think we've come a long way, there's still very much to do. And I think that, in terms of paving the way, I think it needs to be, ownership of, diversity in the workplace. I think we need to ensure that, we have leadership support. I'm very fortunate to have Lynn, and of course, you being part of our Women in Aerospace program, you can feel it as well, to have leadership that supports diversification, inclusivity, and just ensuring that we give women the opportunity to grow within the organization and give them opportunities to become leaders. And I think some of the things that we are doing in these programs really shows that we are actioning what we're saying. And Dr. Wendy said something similar. It's not about just having a conversation. It's about acting on what we're saying. And I think as a leader at de Havilland, I own a responsibility and a position of influence to help support those initiatives and ensure that, we're building our teams that, and we talk about, diversity in many ways, not just having women, but, looking at, how we can actually build stronger teams by having that diversity conversation. And, just as an example, in my team, and I had to build a brand new team, I have women directors, women managers. I have, just a very diverse team, and very proud of my team, actually. So I think, setting that tone, establishing that positive culture, and being able to ensure that, I lead by example is certainly a way to help pave that road within the, not only in the organization, but in the industry.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for that. One of the things I can say is an initiative that de Havilland Aircraft of Canada is doing is, we, like you saw in the video at the beginning of this evening, we're 30 women from across the organization, and we are a part of this mentorship program. And just having programs like that in place, going through that exercise and still going through that exercise, it just makes me, personally, it just makes me realize that, like you said, it's not only the conversations that are happening in a boardroom, but they are actually being converted into actions that we all see today. So thank you for that. Melissa, so what support or investments in your career would you consider the most significant and impactful, and why?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for having me here at this panel and part of Women in Aerospace Canada. So that's interesting. For the military, the Canadian Armed Forces, we always are investing in our people through professional development, courses, et cetera. But I think for me, because I'm a space nerd, it was the opportunity to be recognized for my interest in space. Like I was coming back from Afghanistan and I got a call and someone said, hey, do you want to work at the Canadian Space Agency? And of course I want to work, who wouldn't want to work at the Canadian Space Agency? So that was important for me though, that I was given that opportunity. Like I never would have, I think, focused my career or was able to expand my career in space as much as I have so far if someone hadn't recognized what I wanted to do and gave me the opportunity. Also, though, I will say, why am I the rank I am now? Like, I mean, it's sometimes pretty hard, right? So I'll talk to Maurice Harvey, whose husband is was Lieutenant General. It's hard, right? The military is full of men and women who are very achievement-oriented and type A personalities, of which I am one. So it's hard to advance. So for me, when I was recognized by Lieutenant General Allen, and I'll say her name, not because I want to get promoted, because I think she's a great leader, but she recognized me and said, hey, do you want to be my executive assistant? And I didn't really want to because I was working in a job that I really liked in defense research. And it wasn't really a choice, but what I'm saying that for is, like, I wasn't a choice. I guess she didn't say, do you really want to work for me? It was more, you're working for me, right? But the fact that she recognized me, and that was one of the ways that you get ahead is by being an assistant for a general, and you get to learn what generals do, and you get to learn the system at that level because that's very senior leadership. And I think that because of her, I was given that opportunity and recognized for what I did. And then, you asked what you want to do, and I said I want to go back to space, which is why I still do space stuff. So, sorry, and long answer to your question is that I think the most impactful things for me in my career were to be able to work on spacey things, which I love, which is what I do, and that people recognized and gave me the opportunity to do what I want to do and have the career advancement that I've had today. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa, for that. Well, for me personally, I admire military folks, and I think the closest relation I have to military is in the form of my father-in-law. So a mini story for you guys. So when I first met my husband, which was actually at an airport, Destiny. We started talking, and when he mentioned to me that, oh, my dad's in the Indian Army, and I was like, ooh, you kind of have my attention. Please tell me more. But yeah, it's pretty exciting, the whole military.
Join anytime.
Yeah. I'll contact you.
Okay.
No. I should not say this here. All right. So, now we have talked about so many, we have all of these committees and all of these organizations, subcommittees in the workforce, which is like, women at de Havilland, women in aerospace. Piyush, I have a question for you. So you have been a proponent of supporting women and increasing their participation in the aviation industry. And you have founded programs at Sunwing and Porter, like the YAY Committee and the Women's SOAR programs. Can you please talk to us about, in your words, like what do you see as the importance of having these programs in an organization?
Thank you, Shreya. Thanks for having me here today. I'm a bit nervous being here on a panel with women and these esteemed women as the only male. And a lot of the comments that Dr. Sukhir said actually triggered me to some things that have gone on that I've experienced. I remember a meeting of executives, and there was about a table of eight people. One of them was a female, and I remember the person leading the meeting said, "Oh, can you take the notes?" And I remember gasping at that, but I also noticed that only one or two others noticed that actually happened. The others thought that was okay. And she actually said no, which was great. I thought, you go. My journey in this allyship, started in 2015. In fact, Anna Pingrazzi, who's here, she's right over there, and Lynn McMullen, a friend and a former colleague, they approached me at Porter and said, can you attend the Northern Lights Aero Foundation Gala that celebrates women in aerospace? And so we did, and I remember our CEO was there, and on the Monday following the event, I mean, it was just it's always such an inspiring event, and watching these really successful women in the business, and he said, we got to build on that. Like, we can't lose the energy from that. It was a really great event. We need to do that. We need to bring that here at Porter. So myself and Deanna Stacy, who's the VP at the time at Porter, the two of us were tasked with kind of doing something with that. And so we gathered some people and we created Women's Store at Porter. And really to have metrics and programs in place to elevate women within our organization, but in the industry as well. So we needed money for that. So we had to go to the board of directors and ask for this money because it was out of budget. And I remember we're sitting there in the boardroom, and Deanna did her bit on the why, and I got up to give my bit on how much this is going to cost and kind of break that out. And Don Carty, the chairman of the board, he stopped me. And Don Carty is well known in the industry. He's run many big airlines. He stopped me and he said, why are you up here doing this? And I said, excuse me. He goes, why are you presenting this? And I think it was a good opportunity for me to explain, why this allyship exists. I have two daughters, and I don't know, they're 12 and 16 now, but back then they're younger, obviously. I don't know what they're going to do when they grow up and what industry they're going to be in, but I feel as their father, it's my duty to kind of try to break those glass ceilings for them, right? Whatever those glass ceilings are. And I said the second reason is, and I had just been to a conference in Munich, and it was a gathering of airline executives, and I said, Don, I was the only person who was not white. I was the only person who had black hair, not gray hair, and I was the only person that was under 50 years old. And at the time, not now, but at the time. And I said, you gave me that opportunity. You broke those biases. I look in this boardroom, and it's all white males. But you gave me this opportunity, so I need to pay that forward. I need to give other people that opportunity, and that's why male allyship is good, and not just for women, but also for the diversification in boardrooms and other places. Some of the things. Yeah, we're really proud of what we did at Women's Store Porter. We elevated to 51%, and now those numbers are even higher now, right? Management of female management in an airline, that's unheard of, and we had 15% pilots. Well, that's 3 times the industry average, right? Why is that? What did we do to make that happen? And we built programs. I'll talk about that a little bit later on, but it's really important that we actually do tangible things to bring women and diversity into organizations. We talk about DEI a lot. There's another word that's coming with DEI, and that's belonging. And I really feel strongly about this word belonging, because it's not just putting up a sign that says DEI. It's actually making people feel that they belong in that organization, women and racialized people as well. So I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation. Thank you, Sherry.
That's really good. And it brings about a good point, which is about the barriers that you face in the industry. Whether it be as a woman, whether it be as being of a visible minority. So Sandra, I have a question for you. So you have worked both in the public and private sectors. So, and we know, or at least the way we perceive it, the rest of the public perceives it, the public sector over there, diversity and inclusivity, they're more regulated and they're more prevalent. So in what ways did your experience differ, or how was it similar when you moved to the private sector?
So I spent about 14 years in the private sector before I went to the public sector, so I was able to compare. It is a really great question, because while I think the public sector has a lot of regulation or regulatory type ways of managing diversity in the workplace, I don't think it's much different in the private sector. I think, if you go to a boardroom now in any department within the government of Canada, you're still going to see many more men in leadership roles than women. So, as much as I'd like to say it's different, it's not. So I think that there's, a lot of work that's being done to ensure that there's diversity and inclusion in the Government of Canada. But they face the exact same challenges as we do. And, you know, I think that, you know, within the private sector, there's actually some areas where it's much easier to be inclusive and have diversity. And I think about, you know, even, I'm not sure if I should be talking about this, but I think about, you know, the hiring process, for example. You know, as a hiring director in the Government of Canada, it was very process oriented. So there were lots of times where I couldn't hire the person that I wanted. So maybe it ended up being that white male you talked about because, you know, it was all about process. And so I think there's some of those barriers that can still be broken down in the public sector that we don't necessarily have to worry about as much in the private sector. We can be more inclusive and, you know, make decisions about right fit in our organization. So there's a lot more freedom in that area. But in the meantime, I think, you know, the continuous discussion about equity and diversity in the government, in the public sector, and the requirement by law to monitor and measure and report on diversity, I think, you know, and the workforce, I think that ensures that that continuous conversation happens. And I think that, you know, it does give, you know, women and visible minorities, you know, opportunities, obviously, there. You know, and I think it actually also contributes, no different in the private sector, to ensuring that, you know, we, you know, ensure that it aligns with the rich diversity of Canada as a country, the country that we live in. So I think, you know, there's some really great principles that have been adopted within the government, but we've also, and, you know, come a long way in the private sector from when I started back in, when I was 5. So, but I would say that, you know, I'm really fortunate at de Havilland. Like, this is, I just absolutely love de Havilland Aircraft of Canada. And I have, you know, not only just, you know, a great group of employees, but a great group of colleagues also that really, really support it. So, you know, all these things that we talk about are being adopted, you know, in the federal government are already there within and embedded within de Havilland. So in terms of differences, you know, I don't see a whole lot.
That's quite eye-opening. So I was today years old when I learned this. So thank you for that. But I do want to, Piyush, I do want to probe into some of the things you mentioned. You know, you mentioned that sometimes you were like the only brown guy or the only non-white person in the room, and you did face your own set of challenges in those settings. So talk to us about what was it like for you being a visible minority over there?
Well, you know, that journey starts at the beginning of my life. My parents were early immigrants, and so my sister and I mean, there's not a lot of 52 and 54-year-olds that were born in Canada. We were born in Canada. We were the only people of color in our school. We grew up in a Jewish neighborhood. We celebrated Christmas and Hanukkah and Easter because we had to assimilate, right? Rather than Diwali, right? Like, this is how you kind of do that. My name, you know, my racialized name has always been a challenge for me. I call myself Piyush, which it rhymes with Jewish, and that was easier for me. And my sister still calls me that, even though that's not my real name. My name is Piyush. It was only until 2006, of the encouragement of my wife, to actually go with my real name. And so when I joined Porter in 2006, I can actually tell who my friends were pre-2006 and who my friends were post-2006 by what they call me. And I accept both, but that's something that we have to deal with. I had a conversation with a woman that's on the Northern Lights, associated in the board with us, just the other day, and she goes by her initials. And I asked her, why do you go by your initials? And she said, well, because my name is difficult for people to say, but your name is your identity. People have to make that effort to say your name properly, because yes, it might be different to white people, but it's not different where you come from or anywhere else. So people, you know, I met, in 2018, I was at a meeting in Montreal. We were meeting the Minister of Transport, the VP of Flight Ops from all the airlines, well, 3 airlines, Air Canada, WestJet, and Sunwing. And before the meeting, the night before, I was meeting the VP of Flight Ops for WestJet. And as I'm coming down, he calls me, he says, oh, by the way, the CEO is going to join us. So, okay, now I'm meeting the CEO of WestJet, and I'm having dinner with him. And I get down there, and he gets up from the table and he puts his hand across the table and he says, "Hi, nice to meet you. Can you say your name correctly so I don't mess it up?" And I thought, wow, like he elevated himself to a different level. He actually recognized that saying my name correctly means something, right? It's important. And so the person I talked to the other day, I said, I'm going to call you by your real name. I'm not going to call you by your initials anymore because your real name is your real name. When I joined Sunwing, it was a bit of a hostile environment for me because I had parachuted in from Porter, and the people that were actually working for me at the higher levels, I parachuted in as a VP, but they had actually applied for the job that I now had, right? So now they got this new guy that came in, and now they all have to work for me. And there was one person in particular, a senior pilot there, who was openly degrading me and telling me, why do we have a turboprop guy running our jet airline. Anyway, I called him in my office and I said, hey, why the hostility? Like, I haven't done anything to you. What is it about me that you don't like? What can we do to mend this? And he looked at me, right in the eyes, he leaned in and he said, "I don't like you." I said, "Oh, okay. Why not?" And he said, "Because you're not like the others." And I said, okay. It was a gut punch, right? Like this is what I was facing in this kind of hostile environment. And I said, thank you for being honest with me. Now get out of my office. And I literally kicked him out. It kind of flattens you for a bit, but then you get up from that and you say, wait a minute, I need to do more to not make people like myself or anyone else joining this organization to feel that way, right? That's not okay. And so I'm here to do my job, just like they're here to do their job. I'm not taking anything away from them. I'm just trying to do what I'm supposed to do. So it motivated me to start that YAY committee and build in policies where people feel like they belong.
Thank you for that. It's yeah, those just talking about those experiences and just coming out of those situations, like not drowning in those, but you're actually using that as a launch pad to start something for inclusion. So thank you for doing that. Melissa, I do wanted to get your opinions because we talked about how it is in the private sector, in the public sector, but military, again, it's different, right? And the world that we live in today, there are so many biases a person faces, and sometimes they're conscious, sometimes subconscious, and things that we don't maybe publicly we don't even accept those biases. So I want to know, like, talk to us about some of the biases you have faced in your professional life. And in your opinion, what can organizations do to identify and address those issues?
So I'm going to speak to three. So one, I'm a woman. Two, I'm a visible minority. I'm Filipino by background. And three, I'm LGBTQ2S plus, 2S LGBTQ plus. Sorry, see, I can't even say it right. I'm lesbian. Okay. So there's three. Two. And actually, listening to Piyush, I was like, oh, I was kind of put to shame because my parents emigrated to Canada from the United States. So I'm a first generation visible minority. And for me, I wanted to be assimilated, like the Borg, if anyone watches Star Trek, so because I'm spacey. And so when I was growing up, I wanted to be like everybody else because we were the only Asian family in my grade school, high school in St. Catharines, Ontario, which is different now. But yeah, even so much so that like my parents, my dad, for instance, we mispronounce our last name. So my last name is Reyes, which is Spanish background because the Philippines was not assimilated, but it was colonized many years ago, hundreds of years ago by the Spaniards. So we have a Spanish last name. So it's actually Reyes. So my dad actually mispronounces it on purpose by saying rise. And I say Reyes because that's how it was always said when I was, so I should probably actually be saying it Reyes, but I'm so used to saying Reyes. Like, it's just the way I've done. So So that's the first bias. I will say, like when I first joined the military in 1989, yeah, they didn't have very many visible minorities in the military. But by the time I joined the military, I didn't think of myself as a visible minority. But as a woman, like the military is still 75%, over 75% male. But also it depends upon the type of classification, like your type of work that you do. So there may be more women in certain things. Like for instance, and I will say there's more nurses in the military than female nurses than male nurses, but it just depends. But I remember going to basic training, and the bias was that, there were only like 6 women in our basic training, and I had to make sure that the bias of the fact that I'm a woman, right? You can't hide that. But I remember this one test that we had where we had to climb, I don't know, like a rope up to the ceiling and then come back down. So I had to make sure I could do that, which I did. I can't do it now, but but that was the thing. Like you had to show the guys that you can do it too, and probably better, right? And so for that bias, and even now I find, and I know there are men in the room, sorry, but women, I find we still have to work harder in order to somehow be equal, right? And I know I work hard, so maybe I don't. I don't know. Maybe that's why I'm not a general. Oh, that's a revelation. But yeah. So I'm just saying, I think as a woman, that's a bias too. And again, we're working on that. And of course, there's the Me Too movement that we're working on. So as an organization, a military, D&D, Canadian Armed Forces organization, we're trying to overcome these things that are systemic, that we're trying to work and be better at that. And as far as being a lesbian, 2S LGBTQ+, right? So that is something that we're still working on. I remember in 1992, it was like, oh, that's okay. You can be who you want to be, but that's not true, because I found that like I always, because of my security clearance, I tell my supervisor and I tell the people of whom I lead or who come under me, because I don't want to be able to be blackmailed. So it's very important when you have a security clearance that you can't have anybody saying, well, do this or I'm going to tell somebody, right? So I did that, and it's not supposed to make a difference. And people say that, but it does, right? So I think sometimes when things like that come out, of course it's okay. It's better now. But at the time, I told my supervisor, and this was in the early 2000s, it made a difference. I have no proof of that, but like Dr. Suke said, there were microaggressions, and there are things that happen that, that's a bias that I think that, society's changing. Now it's okay. You can love who you love. You can be who you want to be. You can have purple hair, like in the military. I could have purple hair, or I could have, I could have a purple nose ring or something. But I mean, they're trying to change things like that, such that like it's not just lip service that you're paying to these biases or saying it's okay when it's really not in your head. So I think that for D&D, Canadian Armed Forces, that we are getting better at it. And I think maybe it's a matter of people retiring, like you said. Like, what do we do about that? Well, I guess everyone needs to retire, and maybe me too. But I think as we grow up as a society and a country and a professionalism, like a professional soldiers, professional military, or in any organization, I think that people's attitudes change. Like now when I tell people, oh, I have a girlfriend, they're like, okay, whatever. But before I was always so nervous, oh, I have a girlfriend, but now it's like, who cares, right? Or my major came in the other day with blue hair. That's nice, right? It looks really good actually with a blue uniform, right? So I think that we're getting better as a society, and society then reflects organizations such as the military and other organizations as a whole. So I hope I've answered that question.
Oh, yes. So, at least from my personal experience, what I have learned, and you kind of pointed and hinted towards that as well, is some of these biases do exist. Yes, we have gotten better over the years, but I think it's not always, the other person might not always recognize that, oh, there was a moment where a bias was playing on the field. But if you feel it, then really you should make the effort to bring it up, because sometimes the other person might not even realize it. And if you don't raise it, that awareness does not come. So that's great to have those conversations. It's really important to have that as well. And I think one of the things that really has the power to change a company's culture, it has to come top down. So the kind of leadership you have in the company and the sort of culture they promote plays a big role in how an organization changes and transforms over the years. So that I would want to ask you a question, Sandra, being a VP at de Havilland, so preparing for this event, I did read a lot of surveys. And according to one of the surveys of Iowa Liftoff to Leadership, 71% women, they report having more negative experiences as they're climbing the stairs to more senior leadership roles. So again, I would want to know, like, why don't you talk to us about what your experience has been at de Havilland over the past few months as a VP?
So I think, so I'll answer it in two parts. So first of all, I think from a career perspective, I've been very fortunate. So, I listen, first of all, I am so privileged to be sitting next to both of you. Your stories are just so touching. And anyway, I just wanted to say that. But, I've been very, very fortunate, and I've had a lot of support as a growing leader within the industry over the years. And that didn't change when I came to de Havilland. Well, you've seen the video. You've seen how many women are rising up to the challenge within the organization and the support that our organization is doing there or giving there. I would attribute that in some of the videos. I don't know if you noticed, but, we've seen, Brenda, who's been, an advocate and a big leader in our organization for advancing women. We've seen our owners there, one of which is a woman, and, once again, very inspiring, very passionate about the industry, passionate about bringing, our de Havilland back to Canada, bringing jobs back to Canada, expanding it to Western Canada. If you can't get invigorated and excited about that, I don't know what else could get you excited about it. And then to have, you saw our CEO in the video, Brian Chafe, same thing. It's just so committed to ensuring that even as leaders, under his leadership, that he, ensures that we get the message, and we get it all the time. Make sure when you're hiring that you are diversifying. You're taking the time to make sure that we put the right people in the right places, but really pushing for more women in the industry. And even though our boardroom is not is more men than women right now on the executive team, I have another thing I'd like to point out with you even being here is that I have colleagues around the boardroom table that are like-minded and support women in the industry and don't treat me any different than the people. I'm going to get all emotional now because I'm looking at you guys over here and thinking, wow, what a great team. I guess in a nutshell, we have an executive team there that's very empowering. We have ownership and, a CEO that really believes in this. The program that we have in place now with Women in Aerospace and, promoting that in our organization is at the front and center of our discussions. I love that the mentorship program is there. I've mentored many, many people over the years, and I was telling a story, actually maybe it was yesterday, about someone that I'd mentored back in maybe 15 years ago that had reached out to me, just yesterday and said, I had this situation come up and, this is how I handle it. And she's still in aviation, which makes me very proud. And she said, it was through, your leadership and your mentorship that I was able to do that 15 years later. So I think, as an organization, being able to go and do that for our young women and our leaders, up and coming leaders, is really, really important. So I would say in a nutshell, I absolutely love my role within de Havilland and really happy enough that I'm leaving Ottawa and moving to Calgary. So you can take it there. So anyway.
Well, we're very fortunate to have leaders like you who recognize that. And like we said, we make those conversations turn into actions. So yeah, I feel very fortunate to be a part of de Havilland that way. And one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking is you brought up a good point about Brian. And when we were, like, I will talk about my experience when we were in Calgary attending that leadership program. And the first day of that, of the 2-day training, he opened the class with a story of his. So I'm not going to go into the details of the story, but the thing was, he wanted to. Okay. Sorry, I'm told to skip the story, so no story time. All right. Okay. So, Piyush, I'm going to go back to our conversation earlier that, you're using the biases and the barriers you faced as a launchpad to found different programs at the companies that you've been at. So what were the opportunities you saw when you were elected to be on the board of directors for organizations like the Redwood and Northern Lights Aero Foundation?
Thank you. There's so many good stories, right? I mean, they're meaningful stories, and some of the things you were talking about. I used to work here, right? I used to work at de Havilland Bombardier. 10 years I was here, and there were no women back then. And there's some people, Rob and Philippe, you know what I'm talking about. Nancy, who spoke earlier, she was like, one of very few women. And so it's great to see that the change has happened. It's evolving. And by the way, these buildings, like these were derelict hangars back then. But when I came here today, I was just like, I couldn't believe how incredible this facility is. So congratulations to everyone involved in that. I have a story, so about the Redwood, and it's a story that I've told before. So excuse me if you've heard this before, but a neighbor, friend of ours, mentioned that they heard there was an opening on this board, and thought maybe I should apply. So I did, and then I'm in the interview, and I'm being interviewed for the board of directors for the Redwood. It's a shelter for women and their children fleeing abuse. And they asked me, why do you want to be on this board? And I said, well, my mother was a victim of abuse for 52 years. And until she was 72 years old, she finally had the courage to extricate herself from that situation. And I felt I didn't do enough to protect my mother, and my sister also felt the same. And so I thought this is an opportunity for me to help women in the same situation as my mom going forward. Coincidentally, my sister also joined a board for a women's shelter up in Richmond Hill, but this one was right near our house, and I didn't know where it was until the day that I had to go for my first board meeting. They don't even tell you the address because they're trying to protect all this. And so they tell me where it is, and it happens to be really near a place I drive by all the time, but I didn't know what it was. Just a kind of a nondescript building, but it's a fortress, right? You go in through one set of steel doors, and then you're in a containment room, and then another set of steel doors, obviously to protect the women and children. So when I go to that second door, this little girl kind of walked in front of me. She's wearing a ballerina dress, and she reminded me of my daughter. And I looked at her, and she looked at me, and she was probably shocked that she saw a man, because there's no men in this building, right? And all of a sudden there's a man. She probably hasn't seen a man in a while, right? And I looked at her, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I said, hi, and she just scurried off. And the reason she's there is because something really, really bad has happened in her life, right? There's my motivation right there. If there's anything that's, I gotta help this girl. So then I go down in the basement, and we're having the board meeting, and I'm surrounded by these really, really smart women who have dedicated their lives to social services, to housing, to equity. And I'm sitting there feeling very small, right? I'm usually running these meetings, but I'm now, and how do I fit into this? What am I going to contribute to this? And they were very welcoming, and it's the male perspective, which I think was helpful. I joined the finance committee, so I used my business acumen to help there. I joined, and then I eventually led the fundraising committee. And so I used whatever talents and skills I had as a male to help contribute to this women's organization. And I felt like we made a lot of progress. I left that organization in December just recently, just because I had too much going on. But I was there for 3 years and 4 years actually, and really felt like we were really doing some difference, making some difference. Northern Lights, Anna, right there somewhere, she called me in the fall of 2020 and said, you want to be on the board of directors of Northern Lights? And I was like, wow, right? Only male on the board of directors. And I had been associated with the organization since that first event, and I'd been an advisor in some capacity, but she asked me to be on the board. And so, yes, yeah, sure, that's great. And when I got on the board, I had access to the previous minutes of the meetings, and I could see in the previous minutes there was a debate about having a male on the board, right? And now I can actually read these minutes, and I'm seeing, and it wasn't about me in particular, it was just about having a man in this boardroom. And I thought it was really interesting. And I bet that same debate happened when they were deciding who was going to be on this panel, women in aerospace. I'm assuming that someone said, well, why is there a man on this panel, right? And reading those minutes, I could see that people recognize that there's a benefit to having male allies in this. And we talk about bias, and we talk about people hire who look like them. So if you have all males on the board, all white males on the board, they're going to hire another white male because that's most comfortable to them. Unless you have allies who see that diversity really helps. An organization. I remember our CEO said, our organization should look like the people we serve, right? Okay, that makes sense. Well, but you have to live that, right? You have to actually do that. And that's where these challenges are that we face.
Thanks, Piyush, for that. I'm going to echo what a lot of my fellow colleagues over here said too, that having allies everywhere is definitely helpful. So thank you for that. I have a question for you, Melissa. So you have been, actively involved in social outreach and networking events like this one throughout your career. So talk to us about the significance of these events in your life.
I love it, first of all. But I'll echo what you said, Piyush, about diversity. So for me, talking to other people, so in my career, I've been involved with military people, and we all kind of do things the military way. I was talking to Maurice Herman about the military does it this way, and therefore we'll all do it that way because that's how the military does things. And also we have rank, right? So that when you're in a meeting, obviously people who with a higher rank, we kind of, go, okay, what do you think, blah? But I think for me, doing this networking and doing this social outreach, it gives me different perspectives in terms of leadership. It's not necessarily always the military way that you have to do things. And of course, working with civilian companies, they don't necessarily react that way to yelling or I don't yell, but I'm yelling now, I guess. But I think it's a way of figuring things out on how to approach things, and I think that's benefited me in interacting with all these different people and having these different perspectives on leadership and programs that you have. I remember attending a lecture once from a general who's now since passed, who went through World War II. And I remember when I was told, this is how you lead, and it's the Army way, right? The Army way is you must go get that hill, go take it over. And I thought that's the way we did it in the military. But I've since learned that I don't do it that way in the military. I say please, I always say please. And of course, everyone always says, yes, ma'am. Of course they have to say that. But I think that, I think that there are different ways of explaining things to people, of having that type of, I think that I've learned from being in these outreach groups and social networking, being a quiet leader or just having that confidence, because I've met a lot of women who are like that and other leaders, women and men who are leaders like that, and they have a different leadership style, different kind of confidence, and I really appreciated that from all the social networking I've been doing. So thank you for that question.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. Thank you very much. And I think one last question I do have before I'm told to wrap up the Q&A panel is, looking forward, I really want to know, in your opinion, in what ways can the aerospace industry embrace equity and bridge the gaps we see today? So, Sandra, why don't we start with you?
Okay. Well, I think, there's lots of ways we can do it. First of all, as leaders, not only the responsibility of leaders, I think it's everyone to lead by example. I think that, we need to keep the conversation going. So not have a conversation, but keep it going. And then once again, put our conversations into action. I think that's really important. I think another thing. And, you know, I experienced something when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life, and I had many ideas. But I went to, I remember going to my guidance counselor and asking him, like, what should I do? Like, tell me what I can do. Never once did he tell me, you can be an engineer, you can be a pilot, you can be anything you want to be, you can be an architect, you can be a doctor. It was, well, you know, and my guy friends, by the way, had just left there, and they came out with glorious ideas. And he says, and if he's watching, I'm sorry, but he says, well, you could be a nurse or like a model or something. And I was like, well, that's just great advice. You know? So, you know, I think one message that I would give to everyone today is, you know, go out and be anything you want to be. I was so blessed a few minutes ago, just before we started, to sit down and talk to these two cadets over here. And I was overwhelmed and excited when you told me you wanted to be pilots and that you're working on your license. That is something to be commended. And, you know, I'm married to a pilot. And one of the things that he always said was, we don't have enough women pilots in the industry. And he said some of his best co-pilots were women. And why? Because we pay attention to detail. We have no egos. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. And if we look at our allies and men in the industry, many of them will say the same thing. So I think it's about keeping that conversation going, letting girls know that they can do anything. You know, there's lots of these type of organizations that you can be part of. Girls Can Fly Too is one of them, by the way. In Western Canada, and you know, just don't let anything be a barrier for you. I think, you know, if I think about, and I'm going to try not to get emotional here, but if I think about, you know, all the barriers I faced as a young girl, you know, I have three sisters. Everybody should feel bad for me here, but I have three sisters, the oldest of four girls, and was lost my father when I was 13. And I had to grow up overnight. And, you know, everything felt impossible at the time. And I just woke up one day and said, I made a conscious decision that nothing was going to be impossible. And if I had to wait an extra year to go to school and watched all my friends leave and go to university before me, that was okay, because I was going to work hard and get myself where I wanted to be. And, you know, I would encourage everybody to share your stories, because I think, you know, empowering women and just tell them that you can be anything you want to be is really, really important.
Thank you, Sandra. It's quite inspirational. So, Piyush, why don't we get your thoughts on that, and then we'll go to Melissa.
Sure. There's so many things that you said there and that have been triggered on today. I come back to this belonging piece, but I also come back to when people attend an event like this, they should actually go away with tangible things that they can actually adopt and deploy in their own organization. So I would like to give a few of those. You know, you can put a rainbow flag on a float and go in the Pride Parade, but what does that really mean, right? Does that you can advertise that you're inclusive, but are you really? What are the tangible things you're doing to make a difference in your organizations? When we were with Women's Forum Reporter, we went out into the communities and went to the junior schools with female pilots saying, you can be a mom and you can be a pilot and a wife and you can do all this stuff, and this is how you do it. How do we do that? We built schedules at Porter that accommodated that. You could leave early in the morning, come back in the afternoon, be there for dinner with the kids, or leave later in the day and be there for the morning and take your kids to school, but then also be there in the evening. And for males and females, right? It's universal in that regard. We were trying to hire a female ramp attendant. And there was a high attrition rate there. And we started talking to people at exit interviews, and they said, well, we just feel intimidated. You're in a classroom with 10 other men, and you're the only female, and you know, most of them dropped out before they even got onto the ramp. And then when they got on the ramp, we clustered hiring. So we hired 3 or 4 women at the same time. So when they're in the classroom, they're not hugely outnumbered. And then they feel a little bit more comfortable, and then they stayed, right? That sense of belonging. Female pilots should not have to fly till 34 weeks of pregnancy, right? Make accommodation for them. It doesn't cost you anything if you reassign them to an office job or something else, so they can fly till 28 weeks or something, and then take their maternity leave. What about paternity leave? A lot of pilots, male and female, are married, right? Well, what if we increase the benefits for paternity leave so that the woman can come back and can continue her career and the man can stay at home, right? These are things that are tangible. And guess what? They don't cost anything. That's the beauty of it. At Sunwing, we created, so uniforms are always a challenge, right? And when I first got there was no female pilot uniform. Well, so you wear a man's suit and try to taper it a little bit? No, a female body type is different than a male body type, right? So build a uniform that actually fits them and they feel comfortable in. And then what we did is we blew up the uniform guidelines and rewrote it. And we said, it's gonna be gender neutral, meaning there's not a female and male pilot uniform, there's a uniform A and a uniform B. And if someone's transitioning, then they don't have to go to the chief pilot and say, well, can I now have a female uniform? They could just order a uniform A or B. We took out all references to gender for nail polish, for rings, for jewelry, for hair. If you have long hair and you identify as a male, you can just wear it in the same ponytail that the females have to do to wear it. So now you've entered a sense of belonging for those people who identify in the LGBTQ2S plus community, right? These are things, they don't cost anything. And they make people feel like they belong in an organization. Change takes courage. I tell this to my kids all the time. Change takes courage. It takes patience, but it takes courage. People have to be courageous to make these changes. And everyone in this room can take that away and say, like, let's be courageous and do the things that we need to do to make people feel like they belong.
Thank you. 100% agreed over there. Melissa, what do you have to say to us?
Well, I know we're a bit short of time, so I'll just say very quickly. So I'm a space nerd, as I've said before. So what I would say, and I agree with all your very good points about that, because as you can see, like my uniform, actually, I'm wearing just gender neutral uniform, right? And women and men, we can put our hair back. Men can wear skirts if they want to, and we just put our hair back now. And we can have purple hair, like I said, or blue hair. However, I would say from a space perspective that I think we need to learn from the aviation industry. I think we're working right now on the aviation industry, but we haven't really been addressing the space industry. And space is where we're going, right? Space is where the world and Canada, the world, everybody should be going in the very near future. So to learn from what everyone has been talking about and how you've mentioned belonging, I think that's a very good, important fact. Like I was talking to one of the students here who said that, that there were a ton of females in the first year, and a lot of them dropped out by the second year. And why is that? Because some of them didn't feel like they belonged. There wasn't a support network. So I think when we go into the space industry, which is coming very soon, and if anyone wants to come into space, come talk to me, I think we have to already do what you've done and learn and build upon that. And so I'll just say that from the spacey perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and thank you so much, everyone, for that. Can we have a round of applause for all of them, please? Okay. And so like I was mentioning earlier, we are going to open the floor for Q&A from the audience. But before that, I would like to request Dr. Sukhir to please join us on the stage. And also, in the meantime, I would want to tell you guys that all of you have been an amazing audience so far. So thank you so much for that. You know, especially the folks who are here today. Well, first of all, thanks to everybody who took out time from their calendars to be with us here tonight. Whether you're here in person or joining us virtually, it does mean a lot to us. And especially the people who might not be the female identifying members, or if you are not directly related to the aerospace or the space fields, but you're here today to support everybody, that does carry weight. And like I said earlier, like having allies in the broader community does make events like this a success. So thank you so much for that. Yeah. Okay, so before we start inviting questions from the audience, I don't know if you guys had a look at the screen earlier, but if you do go to Slido, Slido, just go to slido.com, enter the meeting code, and you will be able to enter your questions there. And for the people who are present in person, you can simply raise your hands, and we have our gracious volunteers who are going to run to you with a microphone, and you can just ask the questions, and we have our panelists over here to answer those questions. So if you are using Slido, please go to slido.com. That's Sierra Lima India Delta Oscar.com. Enter the meeting code, which is 2222859, and then you're going to be in the system. You can start posting questions. We have the first question? Okay, perfect. So Ivana is going to tell us the first question here.
Okay. Okay, so the first question, how do we attract underrepresented groups to aerospace or space?
How do we attract underrepresented groups to aviation industry?
Yeah. Or the space industry.
To aerospace, okay. Or space. Well, anybody who would like to answer.
Go
ahead.
I don't know if my mic working?
Yep.
I don't know about aerospace specifically, but in general, when you're trying to attract women to engineering or IT, which is the sector I grew up in, or men to social work and to become primary school teachers, it comes back to some of the points the panel was making earlier, which is if you can't see it, you can't be it. If there's no one like you there, it doesn't occur to you, I think, unless you're the child of we see a lot of women go into engineering because their fathers were engineers and encouraged them to go. But failing that, it's not simple, but you have to really celebrate role models. I mean, I think more women thought about becoming astronauts because of Roberta Bondar. Roberta Bondar was in the schools, she was in the universities, she was celebrated, she was profiled, and I'm sure that shaped a generation of girls thinking about, I think Star Trek actually had a huge impact, had a huge impact on women and diverse people generally seeing the opportunities in space. I mean, there were women captains, there were women scientists. I think media plays a big role as well. And I think guidance counselors, I'm doing work right now with the Peel School Board. If anyone wants to come, please do. Guidance counselors can be the biggest part of the problem because most of them have never worked outside of school boards, and they tend to have very stereotypical ideas. I mean, I didn't know what an engineer was. I was the best girl in math, but I didn't know what an engineer was till I had a master's degree in history and was working with a bunch of them. I thought an engineer was the guy at the back of the train you wave to at the level crossings, right? And that's partly class. That's partly growing up without a father and 3 younger sisters. I share your pain. I'm still suffering from that. But it was also guidance counselors. Like, you could be a teacher, not a nurse. It wasn't suggested that I be a nurse because I'm not caring enough. But guidance, little girls outperform little boys in math and in English in grade 3. But if they're asked, are you good at math? Are you good at English? Little boys are more likely to say yes. And so those notions of self, what you can do, what you can accomplish, start so very, very, very young. We really have to invest upstream. And that's, I didn't have a chance to talk about them, but a lot of the organizations in the room have great programs that are really focused on younger people. You know, air cadets, things like that are really transformative, I think, in shaping what people see as their opportunities.
Thank you, Andy, for that.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to thank you all for the incredible information that you shared with us, and more importantly, the personal stories that you shared with us, because I think they make a huge difference, and they certainly touched me in terms of reflecting on my own experiences. My question is, as you know, this space is really a place for collaboration, innovation, research, and to really sort of support the aerospace and aviation industries, and to get more young women and girls into this industry. So as we look at collaboration between academic sectors, industry, and government, I'm wondering whether each of you can give me one thing, one initiative that you would love to see here in Toronto or in Canada that would really engage young women to get involved in this industry, and how can each of us support their journey into employment?
Can I address from the space nerd side? So disruptive technology in my mind. I think that young girls, like imaginations, like whoever knew or whoever thought that we'd be going into space now, but I will tell you that right now orbiting the Earth are satellites and they work on solar power, right? But what about when we go to Pluto or we go to other galaxies? What's our power going to be? Because you're going to be pretty far from the sun, right? So I think that if we think about in the space sector, disruptive technologies and girls or boys or whoever have these thoughts and want to start exploring them, I think that's what would encourage people to go, yeah, this is my idea and I want to do that. Or they want to launch a small satellite, you know, that's pretty cheap to do, or to explore something. And in space, for example, it's not just about engineers. You can be a doctor or a nurse because you can look at, for instance, the effects of space on the human body. And like you said, Dr. Suki, like, you know, be a Star Trek person and do what Star Trek does, and maybe start watching movies of Star Trek or something in class, because these are where we're going, right? And that's what we're going to look like. So from the space sector, that's how I would see that. Go ahead.
There's so many things that we can do, right? There's just on so many levels. On a personal level, you know, when we were doing Women's Reporter, we had guest speakers come in, and one of them was an former astronaut, and someone asked, how did you get into engineering? Like, what was that? And you know what she said? She said, my dad made me change the oil in the car. And you know, and that kind of triggered me, right? Like, why wouldn't we have our little girls changing the oil in the car, changing the tires? So I teach my daughters both know how to change the tires on a car. Your car breaks down, they'll change your tires for you. Yeah, well, you know, midlife crisis thing, and I have a car racing team, and I took my daughter to where we were working on our race car, and I made her like cut metal. And I made her like realize that you don't have to be a boy to do this, right? And she might not be interested in that after all. That's fine. That's her decision. But we need to break all these gender walls that exist. And I think what you said about the guidance counselors, people, and maybe, you know, maybe I'm stereotyping, but older people don't think that you can be a pilot and be a good mom. And you can take care of your children properly when you're flying all over the place and staying in hotels every night, right? That's not true. It's simply not true. And the sooner we get away from that and realize that the pilots that fly, they fly 12 or 13 days a month, right? That's 17 days they're at home with their kids, right? They might be at a hotel every some days, but they spend more time with their kids than anyone that works a 9-to-5 job, period. So let's get away from that. And I think to answer your question is we need to promote that. From a municipal level, from a corporate level, we need to change all of these ideas that we have in everyone's head that you know, this job is for this person, that's for that. But we can do it at a grassroots level. Go home and teach your kids how to change the oil in the car. Your girls, how to, you know, get them involved in that sort of thing. That might change their direction. And I congratulate the two of you over there for the cadets. I love the cadets, and I love that you're wearing a hijab too.
I think for me, it's once again about encouragement, and I'll give you a little personal story. So when I was growing up in a small town in Newfoundland of 6,700 people, I was very sporty. Always wanted to play hockey, but I wasn't allowed because it was a boys' sport. So I had to resort to a ball in a gym and pretend I played ice hockey. When my daughter came to me, I put her in ballet shoes and put her in ballet at the age of 5. And, you know, I did ballet, so I wanted her to do everything I did. And she came to me after the first year and she says, I don't like ballet. I don't like tights. I don't want to do this. I want to play hockey. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing that. That's like a full-time job, you know? And to be honest with you, it wasn't until she wrote me a letter at the ripe age of 9 years old and left it on my pillow. And it was a big story about, you know, how, you know, she wanted to be a hockey goalie, and how, you know, where would Carey Price be if his dad didn't let him play hockey and, you know, fly him to practice. And it hit me right then that I'm out, you know, trying to encourage women to grow and in their, you know, in their careers. But here I've got my daughter, who I am so proud of today. As you know, she's a very strong woman, but I'm telling her she can't play something that I couldn't play, but because I was a girl. So of course I put her in hockey, and I became like the best mom ever. But I would say that, you know, for me, it would be just continuing to encourage young women and young girls at a very early age. I think sometimes we think, you know, people have to be started their careers to really start to nurture that. And I think, like, you know, with our program, for example, at Women in Aviation, you know, taking people like women, young women, out to these schools really early. You know, that's who should be going out to the schools and encouraging and saying you can do this and you can be anything you want to be. And aerospace is a really great industry to be in. So I think for me, you know, it's not just sending anybody out into these schools, high schools. It's people who are actually experiencing how wonderful it is to be in the industry.
Thank you, everyone. And one of the things I would say is, you know, it's a really good question, because what I remember growing up in India, you know, we having a career in aerospace engineering was certainly not on my radar, because over there at the time, it did not even exist. And when I was in Canada, and it was time for me to select my courses and where do I want to go, bless you. I was very happy to see that at least there is an option to study and have a career in aerospace engineering. So I am just very fortunate that at least I'm in a position to attend a university that offers such a unique course. And although at the time I was told that, oh, you know what, the career options are very limited and it's a very niche industry, you do not want to do this. But little did I know that aviation is huge. And it's not limited to what the general public perceives. So it's great. Okay, we have time for just one last question before we wrap it up.
Sounds good. Thank you very much to the panelists. Melissa, I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for your service as well. I just had one question. Myself, I'm very happy to hear about active programs like mentorship, reaching out, and we've talked a lot about members entering industry. My focus has been leadership. In my experience, a glass ceiling is very visible on the other side. And one thing I noticed, in particular with the military, when I came up, at some point when you're looking left and right, women and members of visible minorities were just not there. And that was a point where I had to turn around, and it went from a push to a pull mechanism to enable other leaders to move into those positions. There was no blueprint for that approach. So I'd love to hear from Sandra, Melissa, and of course the panelists. when you're looking at enabling and pulling other members into leadership roles, what are some of the obstacles or strategies you've used? Thank you.
I think for me, some of the obstacles pulling women into the industry can sometimes be that barrier we've talked about this evening is like, well, can I do this? And, you know, I remember mentoring a young lady, lots of barriers. She had just come to Canada. She didn't know anybody. Her parents were coming later. She wanted to go to school. You know, she did. I'm trying not to give away her identity here, but I took an interest in her because I seen potential. And it was me who saw the potential in her and not her in herself. So I think sometimes that can be an obstacle. What I was super proud of was that, you know, I ended up hiring her. And I saw her grow from, you know, an administrative role up to a managerial role in about 5 or 6 years. And she, her biggest obstacles as I was mentoring her was the can-do attitude. Like, I can do this. Like, how can I jump, you know, into these roles, you know, and be you someday? Because I used to always say, like, I hire people that I think can take my job, because at some point I'm gonna want to retire. So I think that is important. I don't know if I'm answering your question completely, but I think you know, just once again, you know, just walking people through. I think because not everybody is going to have the confidence, I would say, as Melissa mentioned, to, you know, go that extra mile because they're not sure if they can. And it can be very intimidating walking into an industry where it is male dominated, and you wonder if you're, like Melissa said earlier, if your ideas are valid, if you sound smart, if you sound stupid, you know. So sometimes, you know, just pulling that out of people, I think, is really important. So as leaders in the industry now and today, we need to go out and do that a little bit more, and you know, and tell people that they need to be seen and they need to be heard. And I think that's important as we're growing our new leaders.
So thank you for that question. I think from the military point of view, like, yes, I was pushing and pulling when I was coming up, because there weren't very many women. And visible minorities, well, there were definitely not a lot of visible minorities. And at the time that I was coming up, because I joined in 1989, there was the witch hunts a few years ahead of time of people who were gay or lesbian. So yeah, it was a hard road, and it was a pull, right? But now I think for the military, we've changed such that we're reflecting more of the society. And you're right, we have for me, I have the confidence now. I have the rank now, which I think rank also helps. For example, though, like there were, I don't know if people read Maclean's, but there were years ago when there was the you know, Me Too and things like that do happen, right? But the military has changed. So it's not necessarily a pull, it's just being. And in terms of what I would do, I would agree. I need to be the mentor now, because I'm not the seniorest leader, but I'm a senior leader now, right? And I do need to mentor people more and give them the opportunity and say, hey, this is what you need to do. Like I have mentees and they go, what do I need to do to get promoted, right? Because that's sometimes that's what also gets us respect, is our rank, unfortunately. And so I say, you got to do this course, you got to do this, and you have to do this and take this job. And that's what we do in the military. I don't necessarily know in the private sector if they do that, but I think it's mentorship and being a mentor, being a mentee, getting into that program, and having the senior leaders who actually recognize people such that they are given the opportunity in order to grow. And I would agree too, though, that maybe it's not necessarily a pull now or a push, but we have to, like you said, we have to keep sustaining that. And I think every organization is learning from each other, and that we're starting to get better and better. I'm not sure if I've answered your question. But thank you.
The growth within an organization for someone, that's kind of where you're going at, right? How do I grow within the organization? People have often said that I've been lucky. I was lucky that I got the job here, or I was lucky I knew so-and-so and there. And I rephrase that as making luck happen, right? So put yourself in a position where you've worked hard, you demonstrate that you're capable, you're knowledgeable, you go, the extra mile, if you want to call it that. And so when that opportunity presents itself, you will be the visible person, whether you're a racialized or a woman or a white person. You have to set yourself up in that position where you make luck happen for yourself. And people say, oh, they pointed at you. Well, no, they didn't point at me because I'm brown or whatever. They pointed at me because I was the best person for that job. Right? So that's universal. I think it's really important to understand, like, when you get into that level, you have to demonstrate, work hard, and show that you are capable. And you will make luck happen for yourself. I believe that. And it's worked for me, and I think that it can work for others as well.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we don't really have more time for questions, and we do want to start the tours as well. But I think one thing I would say, thank you so much for your participation, and even the audience, thank you so much for your participation today. One thing that really stood out for me was just the honesty and the honest and open communication, the discussions we had today, because that's something you can really relate to and take it away with you and apply it in your daily lives as well, whether it be personal or professional. So thank you very much for that. I would pass it over to Anna now.
Test. For the record, I'm a Trekkie as well. It's okay. Now, to close out our event, I'd like to invite Robert Mobilio, Vice President of Engineering at de Havilland and delegated head of our company's design approval organization, to share some closing remarks.
Wow, how do you follow all of that? Thank you. It's been a fantastic afternoon and early evening celebrating International Women's Day. I want to thank DARE and Women in Aerospace for partnering with us in de Havilland for this fantastic evening and event. I'm really honored to be actually representing many of the de Havilland folks that are here today, and to have the ability to experience the keynote address and this inspiring panel. Honestly, it was extremely inspiring. Thanks. It's been noted a number of times over the night about de Havilland and what we've launched, and the strong commitment we have to this Women in Aerospace and the new program. It's really the start. It's the stepping stone for our diversity and inclusion initiative overall. And for me, I've had the great fortune of working with, leading, and actually being led by a lot of the incredible women in the room here, and looking forward to continuing to progress that program as a whole. For us, and the way we've been building the program at de Havilland, is really diversity and inclusion needs to be a lot more, and we've talked about it, a lot more than just processes and head counts and have we met this. It's really about our people and bringing the people along, and looking at it, developing a workplace that respects the perspectives of our people and our team members, and building those teams that involve, develop, empower, but most importantly, builds trust from the people that we have, whether they're women, from racialized folks, doesn't matter. And that's key for us as part of our building of our diversity and inclusion initiative, where we're starting with women in aerospace and in women in aviation. Having said that, despite what we're putting together and all the plans, and as can be witnessed by what we've seen tonight and some of the true facts, there's a long way to go. And we need to work together, and we need to continue putting the priorities to programs exactly such as this. And so really, we need to focus our efforts on that as an organization. And I just really want to thank everyone here again. Thank everyone. I don't want to keep you from your refreshments for too long. But really, just for everyone here, and in particular the team that works with us here at de Havilland, really to take back to our teams, our colleagues, any of the folks that we're with, to take action, as you've heard here today, right? And really embrace equity in everything that we do and everything that we're going to do going forward. Thank you very much, everyone. And again, thank you so much to the panel. Incredible.
So before we all go, I'd like to remind everyone that proceeds from today's event will be going to Hervolution, which is a place where young women from underserved communities can go to advance their skills, create opportunities for the next generation. It's a great cause for women and STEM. As part of the event, we'd like to raffle off this lovely Dash 8400, and we'd like to ask Dr. Tsukir to pull a card.
Winner is Anna Pengrazzi from Leggett Aviation.
Well, this concludes the formal portion of our event. I'd like to ask all of you to gather together for networking in the atrium. For those who are online, please stay on the Teams, and we'll continue with the virtual networking. Those in person, please join us in the atrium for a photo. Thank you.